Hi, I'm April, and welcome to my studio disaster.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So I think that you can officially today call my studio "What is behind the cache misère," as they say in French. So I'm in. I guess in French. I love the way you say it in French. Okay, the word plasticien, because in English I always say I'm a sculptor.
Should I make coffee?
Hello,
Yeah.
sir.
My better half. Actually, my intelligent half. But I really like the difference between how you describe yourself in English and French as an artist. In English, I always say sculptor because it just encompasses everything from performance to installation and all the muddy things in between. But in French, you know, they have the great word plasticien.
Oui.
So I consider myself in French a plastician and in English a sculptor. I guess always an artist.
So you have a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
You did a lot of work on this house.
Yeah. This is practically the first practical thing I've ever done with like my hands, because this cave was completely a ruin. There was no floor, no water, electricity from before the war, and just everything had to be done. So I actually cut out my bathroom. So I dug out my bathroom, I redid my chimney, because it was only the conduit for the chimney, and put in floors and give us the whole 9 yards. So, and right at the moment, what I generally do is in the winter, I try to do some big project in the house, so that it's not constantly a wreck, just sometimes.
And this mirror here is...
Yeah, this is a part of a series of work that I do, and if you move, it comes on. The idea came to me, I was working with a composer and I was doing some set design for him in the mountains, and we didn't really have a lot of light because we're running off generators. Beautiful place in the Jura. And I got all this mirrors from a factory. And most of them you could really see why they were ruined, because, you know, they were either, you know, move a little, get a little Magritte in there for you. But the idea is that you could, if you looked at the mirrors, they looked good, they looked normal. But if you put a light behind them, you could see trace marks. So I spent a lot of time developing a technique that it works a lot like a lot of other things you do with mirrors, but because each little line is about the amount of a single hair, if you don't have light behind it, you don't generally see it. Of course, there's always an angle you will see it, but the effect is kind of beautiful and surprising, and I like it. And it's also the very simplest way that I've ever come up with to make sure that the person is always part of the work in an active way. Because, and it doesn't need me to do a project, it doesn't need a lot of the other things that usually go with participatory work. And it's sort of that idea that you can't actually see a mirror. If you don't see yourself, it's a window. It makes a mirror super hard to photograph, because if you're not seeing yourself, you're not actually seeing a mirror. So you actually don't have an artwork without the viewer. Because you're always integrated into it, and that's sort of kind of, you know, really from where I started out when I was a young artist with the sort of, I went to school to be in robotics and science, but I was always really interested in this sort of Duchampian idea of like the equation of art, and that's why I got interested in doing participatory work, because even if you have like really straight up art, there's always that cycle, whereas the neat thing about participatory art is that it makes that cycle clearer, because, you know, as art has kind of expanded its reach and it's a little bit harder to tell where the margins are, especially if you get away from the white cube and some of the basic signs. It's your actual act of participating that lets you know you're inside an aesthetic experience. So that's sort of how I got started with it, and I've been doing it for a long time. I just think these are nice because there's not often that you get to make objects that are like kind of intrinsically participatory. And that's usually what I'm shooting for.
So you're doing a lot of installations.
I'm doing less now. I've gotten really interested in two ideas. One is kind of the what I call them is my city sculptures, city books. They're where they're sort of a kind of when you get into that sort of what is the in space and what is the out space, and kind of mapping that space between a city and a place. And I really got interested in it because I think there's something really super literary about cities. And I don't live in a city anymore, so cities are sort of my little obsession, and I look at them differently than when I lived in them because I don't have to deal with them all the time. And I look and they always subtly change because I don't live in them all the time. So it's sort of a lot of my work is about cities, actually.
So you're a very urban, you used to be a very urban person.
Yeah.
What part of US did you come from?
I went to school in Cleveland, and of course, I have friends and did things all over the East Coast. But I grew up in Florida, and basically Florida is one big city now, or one awful, depressing suburb, depending on how you look at it. But I just, there's something very interesting to me about that, and it's gotten more interesting the longer I haven't lived in cities. So when I'm there, it's really a big surprise. Everything's novel. I always notice the things that have shifted, even in a few months, if you're away. Whereas if you're there all the time, you kind of, it's like a fish doesn't notice water. So, and I have a couple of these here that you might be interested in. This one was in the Grand Palais. It's a little bit dirty now, but this one, it's a city of Paris. And what's your favorite part of Paris?
I would say Montparnasse.
Good choice. Let's see, right at the Montparnasse proper, or just along the Boulevard Montparnasse?
Like the whole area.
Okay, all right, so we're right about here, because this is where the train station is. And with my baguette magique, I open it up. And you have to protect the art from all the mess in an artist studio. And so inside each one, there's a different book, but it's not precisely a book. Sort of, well, I guess it is. I have this sort of loopy idea that came to me kind of at the beginning of the end of printed books.
Yeah.
That books are just simply a very specialized kind of sculpture in which you can have both linear and asymmetric time sequencing, so you're not limited to one way or the other. So it's the same images here. Let me turn it around so you can take a look at it. And each one kind of starts the same. I love this quote. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you are interested in maps and mapping.
I love mapping.
This is a map, actually. This is a Dutch map. And if you look at the original of it, it's actually the very first map that I can find of the world from the 16th century, in which you can actually we would identify as the world. It looks like a map we would recognize as the world. And the theme of it was, the world is full. So the inside where the face of the world is a map instead of a face of a fool. And this is in English. It's the devil is in the details, because generally they are. So it kind of starts out each one the same way. There's a central page. Every quote has a direct connection to the place. So the person who wrote that, I knew either lived there, worked there, or there was a historical event that I can place them in that spot. So there's sort of a real connection to the place. And it's not because there's a road named after it or something like that. I know that person was there at some point in their life. Maybe not at the moment of each quote. And so surprising if do you have a blog or something? Or are you working in a vlog?
Yeah.
It's really not surprising because it's such a, an intensely artistic area, and there's almost no one here except for a few philosophers that isn't an artist. So, which is kind of fun. Although there is kind of somewhere in there, there's an American who's like a really famous bartender from that all the jazz singers and painters hung out with during the 50s. And and then after that, it changes. I don't have anything to do with it. It's what other people think and feel. So, like, this is someone put in both the Christian and the Jewish parts of the cemetery of Galerie.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of fun things in it. And every neighborhood sort of has its own feeling, and the kind of things that people put in are really different from one place to the other. And I really love the areas that are just a little bit off the tourist trap, because people put things there instinctively because they have really strong connections. Although the first time I came to Paris, I still remember there's things that's almost 30 years ago, and they stuck with me still, So there's something to be said for tourist sites. And oddly enough, this was at the Grand Palais, and I probably had more people see my work in like 4 days than you would normally have in a decade. And the thing that was really surprising was the way kids love the Eiffel Tower, Tour Eiffel.
Yeah.
Parents, the Tour Eiffel is just kind of a problem, to get around for traffic and the crowds and everything like that. And they don't even realize their kids are obsessed with it and want to go see it because they never take them, they just drive by. So, like for instance, this one's almost completely filled with children's.
That one.
Yeah, where it is almost completely filled with children and they're all from Paris. There's a real connection.
So all these squares have these books?
Yeah, there's about 1,000 quotes. That's sort of my contribution. Of course, the book itself, because they're all handmade. And then each one has, because of the spiral nature of the city, there's really no way to cut it up very correctly. So what I did is just, each one has a different blason from a different historical period in Parisian history. So that one's during the.
How long did it take you to complete this work?
Oh, it was really ridiculous. I guess in a way, it took me about 6 months of construction time, because the whole piece comes apart. Actually, you don't see it here, so it can be moved. It's kind of like Lego, really nice Lego logs. And it had to be done so that you don't slip on it, so that you could roll up on it on a wheelchair or whatever. So there was a lot in there. I think I spent about 7 months on the physical construction of the books, of all the different pieces, and I also built the map, which was seriously a big job, because there were no maps that were the right scale. Either there was too much detail and you get lost in the detail, or there wasn't enough. And you get lost because you can't figure out where you are. But this one I think is really great because I love the kids. Sorry about that. And this very different kind of emblem on this one, because this one is from the Second Empire, and this part of the city I really associate, with this sort of, what was it, the common human, that was all about the city and making money and speculation. And a lot of the book happens in this part of the city. So it's always very Second Empire for me. So, it kind of starts out the same kind of way. Because you have a title page. And then, of course, there's lots and lots and lots of quotes here. It's very different. Like here, that it's, this is kind of a contested space. The kind of lawn behind the Tour Eiffel, because it's the Champ de Mars. And that's the place where, you know, they have the first big ceremony of the Revolutionary period, and so many different things happen there. And it's a bit like they're around City Hall, which, you know, the word for strike in French is grève,
Yes.
and it's literally the grève, which is a name for the area immediately around where you dock and water, and it's right beside the City Hall. And so that's the reason why the word is grève. It's totally tied to the place. And so it's all children, you know. It's lovely, lovely children things everywhere.
Have you shown this work in Paris as well?
Yeah, it was originally at the Grand Palais. Yeah. I think I have a picture of that. Like I said, you know, it's like something where you had a very short-term exhibition, and more people see your work in a really short period of time than we normally see it, you know, like in a decade at small exhibitions. So there's a picture from, and pull off a picture from my site if you'd like. But I really love that. I love the way there are things about the city you can only know in this sort of extremely random way. And I don't think there was a single parent that wasn't surprised that their children wanted to pull out there and not closer to home. So, I mean, but it's just endless children things, interspersed with a few things with adults. And during the exhibition, it's kind of got these little odd pockets, because I wanted people to feel like they could participate without having to write something or feel pressured. I gone around the whole city, and I have all of this ephemera. That's a good example, I think. That was all collected in a very short period of time, and it's basically everything you can get free. And the interesting thing was, this was part of a printmaking and a book fair, antique books, in the Grand Palais. And the word for, and the way you use it in the book world for ephemera, are things that are supposed to go away and don't. So it's a business card or receipt from the 16th century, or wrapping from the Renaissance. So it's just a very queer thing, and it's the exact opposite of how we think of it in the art world. And so I got really interested in that idea. So there's all this ephemera here. So I went around and basically collected everything from all over the city. And the pieces that people wanted, I put immediately in, and then the other things are sealed in different parts. And it's also a kind of socio-economic thing, because if you go up into the 19th and the 20th, particularly when this was done in 2010, a lot of changes that have already happened. There's neighborhoods that are now utterly shishi. There were extremely marginal neighborhoods. And, you know, people didn't even have business cards. They would just like have a little stamp or write on it for a business. So, you know, and a lot of things that were government programs, and you could tell the neighborhood you were, and you could be in the 7th or the 16th, and people were giving away things where, you know, it was incredibly luxe. You know, you would have normally bought it. So that it's kind of like that. So this is kind of the idea of my.
So April, you are a kind of like a jack of all trades. You know, you do everything.
So I guess, I mean, I think there is a thread through it, but I don't think it's a real super obvious one. That's why I always talk about participation, because that's what, to me, seems to link everything together.
Do you also write? Do you document what you do?
I think so, in my odd way. I do enormous amount of research.
I can tell.
The bone of everything I do is research. And every symbol, I think these aren't all on. This one might be on. Right. Some of these aren't on it right now. But are come from pieces where I know there's a meaning to them. I don't have a problem with people, and I really enormously admire people who have a very personal iconography. But I don't think we live in a world where that's sensible, if you want to express anything to another person. Because if you don't have an iconography that's identifiable outside of you, that isn't completely tied to your little small life story, it's super hard for people to like burrow in and start to look for meaning. So, and I think art is just, it's like a visual language, so I suppose I'm writing all the time.
What do you like about mirrors?
Well, they're probably, okay, I'm like complete Smith and nut. If you think about going back all the way back to Plato, and I got into mirrors basically when I moved into the cave because I reread Plato. I wanted to read the Allegory of the Cave, and because there are no cave houses in Florida, let me tell you. So I reread it, and it was literally the most dystopian book I have ever read. The whole, everything wrong with Oxenant is there. And, I was never interested in him as a kid. I was a big reader. I love philosophy. But Plato never appealed to me. But at the same time, he had a certain seductive quality. When you grow up in a world where military people and jocks push everybody who thinks around, or it seemed like a nice option to think of the philosopher king. But if you actually read it as an adult with any kind of like life experience underneath you, first of all, I don't imagine that, I cannot blame this on Socrates, because no one who would give away their life for truth would write such a totalitarian piece of and he so hates artists, and the principal idea, he hated music, he hated dance, he hated all forms of writing that were fictional or allegorical or poetic, the hatred of everything creative, really. And but it really coalesces, and you see it in that story about the mirrors, because it's this idea that what we do as artists is just mirrors. Nobody needs a painter, because it was a big thing in the day. Because you can just walk around with a mirror, and you put yourself inside something pretty, and you're going to get this beautiful little thing. And so mirrors got to be real interesting to me, because that's really about where there's a big cleave about what making art is, and even what like looking at things is. Because if you actually look at anything, a mirror is an utter transformation of reality. You can't read off of it. Well, actually, I've gotten to the point where I can. But in general, it's a complete distortion of reality, and in lots of super specific ways. And even that allegory about mirrors, because it's like a thing that flows through time, because if you get to the Renaissance, it's actually this idea of mirrors. I don't know. Basically, what he was trying to do is he was creating mirrors, and what he wanted to do was figure out the mathematics of how things change around. And he had this really like morbid citation from the Bible about this idea that you'll see through the mirror darkly. And back then, mirrors were actually, silver. And he was also a silversmith. So what he had done is he had poked a very small hole, and he painted on the mirror, okay? And then what he did is he used that, and then he had another thing. So he did this whole trick when he was convincing people of the point of this, where he'd have somebody looking through a little hole. Now he'd done the painting exactly at that point. It pops up into place, right? And the person goes, oh my God, they go from the real thing to this. Now we wouldn't buy it, but for them it was like, whoa. So this whole idea, even our ideas about perspective and a certain very rigid way of seeing the world kind of flow from that. And even like going into, get real super contemporary, because it's that very mathematical idea which we build our video cameras out of. And we build pretty much every image you have mathematically, because it's all just math.
So you are now getting ready for the season.
Yeah. What I'm kind of doing right now, and it's a little bit more long-term thing, is with jewelry. But I want to kind of make it really more about a problem. I do these things here. Let me see, I have a couple of them here. There's a couple of things. Some are about memory, and women, particularly with computers, because I don't know if you know, you may, lots of people do, but computer used to be a woman's job, literally a woman's job, a gender job like being a nurse before there were computers, and all the original programmers were women, and it wasn't considered important work. Programming had no real prestige. It's only in retrospect, and actually only because so much of it was done in government labs that we even know the names of a lot of the people who did the most important work.
So we're talking early 60s.
No, we're
70s.
talking beginning in the 20s, flowing through to the 60s. Because I don't know if you saw, there was recently a movie in the 60s, Hidden Figures, the women who actually did the calculations for the original moon landing.
Yes.
Because at that point there wasn't enough faith in a digital computer to ensure that if you're counting on someone's life to come back, you can count on it to make the calculations. So they were still using people. And I think she's here. I know I have her somewhere. But
There are lots of women here.
yeah, they're all women who've done something. So this is actually Christina de Pisa, who, as far as I can find out, in the West wrote the very first feminist track. And I have another one somewhere where it was the first in Chinese, but of course it's long before then for China. But she wrote a book that was a response to some of the really kind of overtly misogynist work of the period. So it's great, and it's like puts all of the city of ladies. It puts the whole virtues of women, and they're not just kind of like your classical, because you have to remember, if you start looking at sculpture, women personify almost all forms of like what we would now call gendered roles, because you had lots of pretty pictures of pretty girls, and this one's, this is one's wisdom, and this one's patience, and all that sort of thing. So what she'd done is she created this. The book is a kind of an imaginary city that makes her case for why women have value, and she brings up all the women from the past who've ever done anything interesting that she knew about, at least at the time. And but also this sort of allegorical idea of space and women of thinking spatially, even in a literary way. And I'm not really a very visual person for being a visual artist. I really am. I'm a person, I can only remember a telephone number by how my hands move, and I don't really have like a mind's eye. I sort of have like a mind's hand. So it's very interesting, and I've met quite a few women who kind of in that boat with me. And if you look at a lot of women's literature, it's even like, and it's interesting because this kind of goes back to, I think I have her somewhere around here, a woman of one's own. So the whole idea, the only way to be a creative woman is to literally have some kind of space that you can wrangle for yourself that is your own. Otherwise you just really can't have a creative life, One of my favorite books.
So you're very kinesthetic.
Yeah.
So you use your senses to create and even think.
Yeah. I don't see in pictures anyway. I hear things, I feel things. If I can conjure up things that are very, very visual from it, but I don't have like that sort of TV in the head. Which is kind of interesting, being a visual artist. So I think it makes a little certain kind of funkiness to everything I do.
You've done a lot.
Yeah. So the idea of this, though, is all of these are women from science and mathematics and computer science. And also, if you kind of get that idea of STEM, so I have a set that are all women from, like with directing with films. There are very few directors now, but in the silent film era, there were many directors, and like actually almost all the kind of like original innovations, like the first person to make a story in a film instead of just showing things going by, and the first person to use multiple sceneries, things like that. And a lot of them were French. And it happened here in Paris, but a lot of them happened in the United States as well, because a lot of women that were doing causes and doing documentaries. And there's also quite a few women who are now only remembered as movie stars of that era, who actually directed all their own films. They were auteurs before anybody called auteurs, because it was the only way a woman could get a decent part. And there wasn't the same kind of money involved in the silent era. So you could kind of pick up a little bit like you can now, and on a more guerrilla budget make a film. And when you get to talkies, that all dies out, because you just need a huge budget, and the studio system comes in and pretty much crushes all that. But really, early movies are, interestingly enough, almost 50-50 when you really start hunting around. And it was interesting for me also, this idea with computers, because in the beginning it's all women. It's incredibly gendered. And everything that's valued now was just, I wouldn't even say despised, but simply just, what girls do, how can it matter? So I find it really, really, really funny. I mean, even when I was young, I remember when it was still that way, or the tail end of it, because I went into robotics instead of more of the software side, because I was a bit of a little proto-feminist, or second wave feminist, whatever I was. And I just didn't want to follow like the gendered path into technology. And so because at that point still most programmers were women. Most were just women who had either been literal computers or had been secretaries who get, that becomes their job. So, and I went into more on the hardware side, because it's hard, it's masculine, all that kind of good nonsense. But it's so weird to me that girls come up now with like no sense of that. It's like the extent at which they've been shoved out as soon as there was money and prestige and value, the thing that they actually generate. I mean, like right down to the mathematician, the recursion inside of a loop, inside of a program, which every single thing in that camera, the internet, revolves around being able to recursively move in loops through things, was a woman. I mean, even the mathematician that came up with it. So it's just really odd to me. So I was thinking about like a way that you put on your body and give women faces and identity. So my idea is they're all women that I have a quote from. I can find a quote, and so they have a face and they have a voice, instead of, because most of the time in history women are talked about in somebody else's voice. But there are just so many women who have done interesting things that we just sort of forget about. Like, she died very young. It's a bit of a sad story. She is the very first chemist, African-American chemist, to become a professor in the University of Hawaii. And her name is Alyssa Bell. And she is the person who came up with the very first effective treatment for leprosy. It wasn't a cure. The cure comes, with antibiotics. But this essentially ended the way leprosy had been. It brought in the 20th century. There were no more lepers, because, at least they had a treatable condition, instead of, stick them in a hole and watch their parts fall off. She died very young. And for a very long time, her work, her boss, because she died so young, stole her work and published it as his own. And one of the colleagues, her colleagues at the time, who knew her when she was alive, later on, like, I can't remember how long, but it seems like it was more like 20 years, like when they had some personal prestige, wrote, went through all the files, did all the things necessary for them to get credit again for their own work. And the same thing there's a lot of that in astronomy, because a lot of the organization you have, even in computers now, comes from how women were organized into groups to do calculations, to do large-scale calculations in science and in textiles. And that's one of the reasons why Babbage and the whole textile thing is, because you actually had to make textile. You needed a lot of people making calculations for how many for weaves and webs to do elaborate patterns, because of the Victorian age, the patterns are really elaborate. So someone had to make those calculations so you knew exactly what place to put each color thread. And so they would have these big gangs of women, and there were certain ways in which you kind of almost programmatically used human intelligence to generate extremely complex equations and then turn around and also check them, because we're having people do things in parallel. So if two people didn't come out with the same, and they would cross over at different points in the calculation, so you could cross-check in different places that people were not going through the process in the same way, so you could keep checking for errors. And in the same way you kind of do that when you write a program, you do error checking continuously through it. So even that is embedded in how our technology.
So you actually, what you did in your work is blending, bringing together these worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my worlds and things I care about. And I just kind of think, as an artist, there's a lot of ways to be a great artist, or even just a creative one, or a productive one, or anyone. But for me, I've had this thing since I was a really young kid, that, when you're in the presence of art, what's inspiring about it is that it makes you want to make something. It sparks off something that isn't in it. And I think some of the more outlandish things that people say in terms of interpretive about people's work is because they see the next work, the one that isn't in the work in front of them, that they probably should be making. So there's kind of like a process, and everybody who comes before you is kind of, you're talking, they're talking to you, and you're talking to somebody else you'll never meet. So, which I love that idea. So it's about. So I don't know if you know anything about e-waste and what a huge problem it is. There's actually inside electronic waste 60 times more gold than in a gold mine, like 40 times more silver, some ridiculous amount more of copper, but I don't remember the exact statistic. And the idea is that if we were mining this stuff, instead of sending it to third world countries to have young children get polluted by, all the lead and mercury and PCBs, and it can be done. And so I'm on this project to make jewelry that not only are the parts, these are the pieces from when you cut it. I go and I work with a cooperative, a fab lab in Tours, and I cut all my pieces with a numeric cutting device, so it's all CNC, and then I cut it so that I minimize the waste, and then I use the waste to make pieces that are completely in, and it's really fun how you end up getting something that's extremely organic looking just from the waste, so you don't get any waste, so I don't put anything back in the environment, and to just kind of work on that as an idea of people being more conscious about it. And so I want to work I'm in the process of getting together to have a residency to completely make everything from precious metals that come from a proper waste system, because it's really easy for people to understand. It takes a huge upfront cost to set these things up, but they're like reduced by 10 times, not 10%, 10 times the carbon footprint of things. We literally have more minerals that we need for contemporary life in our trash than are in the ground. And every time we go out to someplace in the ground, it's another war, it's another poor country, kind of, or delicate environment raped, and we don't have to do it, but somebody has to make the effort up front. So I want to make it all with gold and silver that comes from a real ecologically sound. I'm never very good at whatever the current buzzword is for this kind of thing, but essentially durable façon de trouver ça. Et c'est juste la début de ça en France. Et avec les nouvelles normes européennes, c'est un pouce pour ça. Mais en même temps, le plus grand problème pour les déchets électroniques, c'est les gens qui avoir une dizaine d'anciens ordinateurs portables, n'importe quoi, qui restent chez eux, qui soit c'est juste dans un coin, on fait rien de tout, ou ils mettent dans le déchet normal et c'est un très mauvais pollutant. Mais si c'est recyclé correctement, il peut être vraiment une mine d'or, dans le sens littéral, une mine d'or. Voilà.
Now, at the end of the month, you're going to open the studio for
That's
the public.
right. Yeah, I open about half because half is my home and all of it's my studio. But I do clean it up, make it fit for human consumption. And through the kind of the tourist season, people are welcome to come in at any point. And actually, if you see that I'm here, you can always come up. It may be the jumbled mess that is today. I have a friend that says that either my floor is impeccable or you can't see it. So today you can't see it.
So how about we meet again in about a month or less?
Sure. Every time I've moved environments, it really influences how you think about things. But this village is really old. It dates because there's both flint and natural caves. This isn't a natural cave. This cave is about 1,000 years old because this part of it was a quarry. And it's really interesting because you can see the history of the cave in here. Because this part of the cave, you see this beautiful arch, and you can see the marks in the back, is 1,000 years old because the chateau is 1,000 years old. And but if you look here, you can see that the archwork is much less exact. And if you look at the walls where they meet, the marks are not the same because it's not the same tool, it's not the same era. And then the bathroom is I did, so it's about 6 or 7 years old now. And so it was also dug by hand. Because a cave, if there's no vibrations and you keep the trees down, it'll be here thousands of years past you. And this village though has prehistoric a site in it. There was 2 or 3 archaeological digs that have found camps, and then of course it was there's a menhir. So there's the menhir civilization, which was before the Celtics. There's a menhir in the river because it fell over in I think the 18th century or something like that. And it's just basically through it was a Gallo-Roman village. And it's a place that's a lot less important now than it was before, because it's an affordable place for the river. So I mean, this little village was even in what was it? The Gallic Wars, Julius Caesar. It's just one word. It's just because there was this great they didn't really fight very much. The Gaulois, but they did fight between. They made a line between Orleans and Le Mans, where they actually fought. And this place is a point where you could ford along that line, and so it was a defense point.
April, thank you so much. And
yeah, like I said, I can talk forever, which I could probably talk less. And this, if you want to see, because I feel. Let me turn this one off so you can see. But if you go to our church, which is actually built in an old Gallo-Roman temple, there's some stones that are believed at least to be from the original temple, and there's this mark right here. But what I have on it is the alphabet, because not many people realize that the Gauls had a written language, because it's queer. They weren't allowed to write anything important, but they used it for war and they used it for business, for things that were completely disposable. And what you just did is you had a stick, and you made like dashed lines. It was kind of like similar to Morse code, except for every single letter was also associated with tree, because they were a forest people. And they rarely saw the sky, so their whole astrological system was oriented around trees. And so each letter is associated with a tree. And anyway, this is the song for our village. C'est la chanson de Lavardin. Celle-ci, c'est une très grande copie d'un motif qu'on trouve dans l'extérieur d'église. C'est une église je crois, du XIIIe siècle, mais c'est sur un site très ancien d'une église plus ancienne et avant un temple gallo-romain. Je crois c'est de Ipona qui est le dièse avec le cheval gallois. Un dièse très important. Mais par contre, le symbole, le motif, c'est ça, mais cette marque, c'est une lettre et c'est des refrains de chansons de village. Et c'est Sweetheart, I'm having a brain freeze about the beginning of the song.
Do you know the song?
Yeah, we all know the song. Yeah, you have to get the.
Levons nos
Oh,
verres.
nous levons nos verres et chantons
avec un train.
le meilleur coin de le verre.
Le
bien.
île de la
Non. Ok. Campons, levons nos verres et chantons avec entrain le meilleur coin de la terre, le pays de Lavardin. It's really funny when we first moved here, and there were a lot of older people that kind of from before the war that unfortunately all passed away. It was great because we were étrangers, not because we were from America, but because we were from the next village over. Literally, everyone that wasn't from Saint-Romé was an étranger. And Saint-Romé is even smaller than Lavardin, so anyway, so it was a pays de Lavardin.
Okay. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again in a few weeks.
Voilà, et tout le monde, c'est bienvenu pour les horaires en les saisons touristiques. Mais par contre, si tu vois la lumière, tu as toujours le droit de taper sur la glace et demander si l'Américain fou c'est disponible.
Non, vous n'êtes pas fou.
Non, c'est vrai, tout le monde sait. En fait, une fois, je laisse mes coordonnées avec quelqu'un qui oblige et demander le mari, et le mari dit, oh oui, c'est Aprille. C'est ça.
I think you're a genius. Trust me. You've come up with so many ideas.